Good morning, bom dia, welcome, sejam todos muito bem-vindos. I'm Bruna Santos, Senior Advisor at the Brazil Institute at the Woodrow Wilson Center, and I'm delighted to welcome you to this webinar, What's Next for Brazil, Elections and Beyond. In 6 days, all Brazilians are heading to the polls to elect a new president and a new Congress. For Brazil, the upcoming election is a pivotal moment. So it is great to bring together here our network, community, for this important and well-timed discussion. So at a moment of political polarization in the country, Brazil electoral process and institutions are increasingly under the spotlight. So the contest between the two main candidates in the polls, the front-runner left-wing former president Luiz Inácio Lula da Silva and the incumbent Jair Bolsonaro is entering its final stretch, and it's yet unclear whether or not we will have a runoff on October 30th. So there are concerns regarding the transition of power. There are concerns regarding the pace of the Amazon's deforestation and the confidence we have in the strength of Brazilian democratic institutions is going to be challenged. But this election is also an opportunity to reinforce Brazil's democratic system and public trust in democracy. As people say, campaigning is hard, but governing is often even harder. So the next administration will face a range of social, economic, and institutional challenges. The country is still suffering the effects of a turbulent global economy, including high inflation, unemployment remains high, and about 33 million Brazilians are going hungry. In terms of productivity, Brazil has stagnated for the past 30 years. The country's fiscal situation is fragile, and for the first time, the executive branch will not have as much power as it had in the past over the budget. So all that point to challenge ahead of whoever wins this election. And as Brazil has all of us pausing to outline and analyze the twists, turns, and implications of what the country is facing, I hope this panel brings you all valuable perspective to actions and opportunities ahead of us. So to comment on that, we convene today an incredible panel. Aniele, Bruno Caraza, Beatriz Rey, and Paulo Sotero. Aniele Franco is president of the Instituto Marielle Franco. Bruno Caraza, my namesake, who is professor at Dom Cabral Foundation and political columnist at Valor Econômico newspaper. Beatriz Rey is SNF Agora visiting fellow at Johns Hopkins University. And we will count with the final remarks delivered by Paulo Sotero, former director at the Brazil Institute and our distinguished fellow. So one more thing, I emphasize that this event is open. It will be recorded and available on our website. So feel free to share it in your network. And you can comment on our website where you are right now watching the event. Feel free to engage in this conversation, send questions and comments. And also, if you use Twitter and post something related to the event, feel free to tag Brazil Inst, and we can carry on this important conversation later and also spread it to other people interested in Brazil. With all that said, I want to welcome our panelists this morning. Welcome, thank you all for being here. I will make a round of questions to each of you, and I'll start with Aniele. First of all, thank you. I really appreciate you accepting our invitation. Aniele, I will start with you. So many questions are unsettling people these days. Political violence is increasing with, for example, conflicts over environmental issues. And we cannot rule out the possibility of post-election demonstrations if the president, violent demonstrations, if the president challenged the results. So what is, in your view, the risks of violence during and after the election? What are the risks that can the 2022 electoral process, the campaign and the election result have for the Brazilian institutions? Thank you so much.
Hi, everyone. Good morning. Once again, thanks for being here. I'm Aniele Franco. I'm the executive director of Marielle Franco Institute, and I'm Marielle Franco's sister. It's a pleasure to be here with such people that I'm honored to share this space. Well, Marielle Franco Institute was born after a political violence, if not one of the biggest one and the toughest one that we've been seeing since 2018. With that being said, we also saw an increase of violence, but not only towards like people who would like courageously put their bodies to be a candidate for something, but also for people to support or to just give your opinion, just like me and many others. So this year we had a man who was killed just because of a theme of on his birthday party. And this past weekend, we also had a girl in Rio de Janeiro who was hit on her head and was in the hospital. And when people hit her, said that she would be beat up like a man because of the position that she offered. And right now, we are facing a very challenging moment in Brazil. I don't think that it's only because of we are so divided in this election, but because the government that we have elected now legitimate this kind of behavior. It's not easy for people, to just see and watch and be like, oh, maybe I'm not gonna say what I think because I'm scared about it and scared of dying or scared of being get beat up on the street because of this. I don't know if the election is going to bring the results that we want. I hope so. But at the same time, I'm very concerned about election day. I'm very concerned about that period, like after October, before January 1st, because we don't know what to expect. We have many specialists. I think Paulo and Bruno and Beatriz can speak better than me about that. Many different specialists saying that maybe it's going to be okay, maybe it's not going to be okay. But what we've been doing here, it's kind of to increase and improve and help Black women who want to be candidate, who are now going throughout this, to be strong, to be safe, helping them on digital media, on media society and all that, and also help them about security. Because since 2020, we've been this increase of political violence, and we did a research on it, and we've seen many Black women who got threats. Even some of them, had some physical harassment that they leave it there. So it's been very complicated, but at the same time, we understand the importance of doing something. So when we create, for example, we create a project called Agenda Marielle Franco, where we put out the agenda with all the work that my sister had done in 1 year and 3 months, and told people, hey, these are some of the projects that she used to have, and some of them were approved. So rather than just speak about Marielle, you can maybe be compromised and do like Marielle. And since then, we've been trying to put that out to the society and show people that we need to defend human rights, defenders. We need to be alive. It's not gonna be okay for us to do like a beautiful campaign and in the end, people gonna get died, just like my sister. We don't want that to happen to any other Black women in Brazil. We don't want that to happen with anyone, And this is something that we've been speaking since 2018, is that political ideology cannot be bigger, like huge, or even more important than our safe, like human rights. It can't be. So I hope in the end of the year, whoever wins this election, we're going to have respect and a better place to live. And I do hope that we have a lot of Black women elected. And I also hope that we can come back next year, and speak about what we did, and see that people that respected each other and political violence has not increased. That is not what we're gonna see, what we have been seeing now, but that's my hopes for these next couple months. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aniel, especially for your personal testimony on this. And I move to Bruno and ask him, Bruno, if you asked me in 2018 about a possible Lula-Alckmin ticket in 2022, I'd say no way. And this is only one of the many things we could not foresee back then. So considering the two leading candidates in this dispute, I want to ask you to comment on governance and governability challenge, no matter who wins will face. And also, how do you envision possible scenarios for Brazil on these two fronts?
Well, good morning, everybody. First of all, thank you for having me. It's a pleasure. I'm really proud to be invited for this webinar in such a prestigious think tank, the Brazil Institute at Winslow Center. And well, the scenarios for 2023 and beyond in Brazil will depend, of course, on the winners of the presidential, but not only the presidential, but also the legislative elections on this next Sunday. And here we should discuss the conditions of political governance in an eventual Lula or Bolsonaro's victory, because I don't expect a significant change in Congress profile in Brazil in the next legislature. For those that are not much familiar with Brazilian politics, in the last decade, we observed the emergence of a political group that it was called here in Brazil, the Centrão, the big center. And despite this name, Centrão, they are not in the center of the ideological spectrum in Brazilian politics. In general, the members of Centrão are conservative, and they have special interests on pork barrel public policies and lobbying for their own business or their friends' business in general. Most of them are large owners of land, and most of them are agriculture producers, for example. So today, Centrão comprises 1/3 to a half of Brazilian Congress members. And I don't expect that this will change in the next legislature. For the contrary, there are a lot of tools in movement during this current legislature that reinforces the power of Centrão. And what we saw in the last 2 years is that the leaders of Centrão, especially the House Speaker, Arthur Lira, have made a movement to support Jair Bolsonaro. So in the case of Bolsonaro's re-election, probably nothing will change in Brazilian politics. The president would be a kind of hostage of Centrão that will impose conditions to approve its agenda, especially more power and more budget control. But on the other side, if Lula wins, I see that it will be much more difficult for him to govern than it was 20 years ago when he was first elected, by the fact that Centrão will be stronger than the left in the Congress in the next year and on. So I expect that Lula will concentrate his actions on two directions. At one side, I think that he will use its presidential powers to change Bolsonaro's policies regarding, for example, environment, guns control, and public policies like health or education by means of decrees that don't demand Congress approval. However, on the other side, Lula will try to negotiate with Centrão leaders to pass some of its priorities of legislative reforms that we don't know yet what they are, because during the campaign, as you said, it's much more easier to campaign than to govern. During the campaign, Lula was not so clear about his priorities if he wins the elections. My guess is that probably he will focus on the beginning of his mandate. He will focus on new fiscal rules in order to combat poverty or hunger, and he will have to change fiscal rules, and he will need the support of Congress. So he will have to negotiate with Centrão leaders, and maybe he will focus on tax reform to improve Brazilian productivity, Brazilian competitivity. Those are my bets for the next mandate if Lula wins the election on next Sunday or after on a second round.
Since you have 2 more minutes, I will ask you a quick question. How do you think that this scenario changes if Lula wins in the first round or the second round?
Oh, yes. A victory of Lula on the first round will demonstrate his strength, and probably he will use its strength to attract support for his beginning of his mandate. Lula is trying to create an ample, a wide forces for supporting him. For example, as you said, Geraldo Alckmin, that he was his opponent on the past, and Henrique Meirelles, that was candidate on the last elections. So if Lula wins on the next Sunday and finish the dispute, probably he will have more strength, more power to negotiate support for his next mandate.
Thank you, Bruno. I'm sure everyone watching is interested in Brazil and following the polls. As we have seen in the past weeks, the Lula's odds of winning are rising, even though we don't know if there will be or not a second round. And the polls have also shown that the support for Ciro Gomes and Simone Tebet is dropping, probably a sign of what we call strategic voting. And Bolsonaro has been like pretty much flatlined over the past 2 or 3 weeks. And just like one important message that you give us is Centrão will continue to be an important political group in Congress based on your perspective and the scenario that you were projecting. No matter, so whoever is the next president, we will have to negotiate with them. And since we are talking about Congress, I want to ask Beatriz, Bia, I want to ask you, well, governing will require the next president to negotiate a new budget pact with Congress, as you have written about and we just talked. So if Lula wins, how might he handle that? Could you explain a little bit more for our audience this dynamic and how it has changed and how it may affect the election and the Brazilian party system?
Thank you for inviting me. It's a pleasure to be here. I want to start answering this question by highlighting that legislative institutions have been getting stronger since the early 2000s, and not just in terms of the budget. So for instance, in 2001, Congress approved a constitution amendment that disincentivizes the use of provisional decrees, which are equivalent to executive orders in the US. Congress has also become more powerful in lawmaking. In 2009, for the first time ever, it passed more laws proposed by legislators than by the presidency. And this trend continued throughout the last congressional session. So my point here is that Congress's increasing budgetary powers must be understood within this context of legislative strengthening. Now, Congress has become more powerful than ever in budgeting during the Bolsonaro administration. To illustrate my point, earmarks, which are the funds that legislators send to their districts. In Brazil, we call them budgetary amendments. They represented 20% of the discretionary budget in 2020. They now represent 32.5% this year up to July. How did this happen? Part of the reason is what we know in Brazil as the secret budget, which are secret rapporteur earmarks. So the rapporteur is the legislator who writes a report on the budgetary law. Before the Bolsonaro administration, these earmarks were used for minor funding allocations. The rapporteur now uses his earmarks to send funds on behalf of other legislators. So the secret budget is secret because it is untraceable. We don't know who sends how much money to whom because it all goes under the rapporteur rubric. In 2020, 7 million reais were spent on rapporteur earmarks. Up to July this year, 10 million reais were spent under the same rubric. So there is a lot of money. Congress now controls a lot of money in earmarks, but it's not just the amount of money that is problematic with the secret budget. The secret budget has the informal arrangement that sustains it, gave a lot of power to the speakers of the House and the Senate, making Congress even more powerful. So the decision of who gets to send earmarks under the rapporteur rubric is coordinated by the speakers with the rapporteur and individual lawmakers, bypassing party leaders. I here just want to remind that the executive branch hasn't really been the main actor coordinating earmark politics since 2015 because it passed 2 reforms that made it mandatory for the executive to spend their proposal individual and collective earmarks, 2015, 2019. But my point is that Congress has lost more ground to Congress of its power under Bolsonaro. What will happen moving forward? What it seems likely is that the Supreme Court will be the actor that will end the secret budget. Justice Rosa Weber might judge that it is unconstitutional right after the election. If that happens, the new president, if it's not Bolsonaro himself, will have to coordinate to reinstate the non-mandatory feature of the individual and collective earmarks so that the executive regains the leverage it had to build its legislative coalition. If the Supreme Court doesn't act or act to maintain the secret budget, the new president will have to find a way to end the secret budget by negotiating with legislators. Now, this will not be an easy task because the secret budget arguably benefits all lawmakers. Who doesn't want a blank check to send funds to their constituents without being traced? So it will be a very, very hard task if Bolsonaro is not the president. The consequences of this process, especially in relation to the secret budget for the election, to me are very clear. The legislators who relied on the secret budget to send money to their districts have an electoral advantage over those who didn't, or those who are trying to get elected for the first time, who are not sitting in Congress right now. So for the party system, it's hard to say. On one hand, several institutional reforms should reduce party fragmentation after this year's election. On the other hand, the secret budget weakens party systems in the legislative arena. In any case, to me, after the election, what I consider the most pressing problem with our party system will not disappear. The only programmatic and institutionalized party that we have in Brazil is the PT. This has been the case for many years. All other parties lack organization, penetration, representation, and adherence to policy commitments. And political science tells us that this is a recipe for constant instability.
Thank you, Beatriz. I will ask you one final question, and based on your perspective of Congress and executive, what do you think are the this question came from the audience? What is the most relevant election in economic and external policies matters, the legislative or the presidential one? And I think this is a curiosity that the public here in Washington has about Brazil's foreign policy. So if you could answer it, it would be very helpful.
For foreign policy specifically, I would say the presidential election, right? Congress doesn't have much of a say in foreign policy in Brazil. However, given what I just told you about how powerful Congress is in relation to the budget, in relation to lawmaking, I would urge people to pay attention to congressional elections. Please pay attention to congressional elections. They are more important than ever, and who is going to get elected to Congress will change a lot of the political landscape in the upcoming years.
Totally agree, Beatriz, and thank you so much for your insightful remarks. So I think no one questions that Brazil's democracy is under a severe stress, combined with global trends of declining democratic freedoms. And we see concerns, we see opportunities to reinforce endeavors to strengthen institutions and redesign institutions as well. So I want you all to, in this final remarks, I wanted to ask each of you to comment on how you see these tensions, especially among Brazil branches, and what you see as possible future role undertaken by the elected president to build a more resilient democracy. And I will start with Aniele.
Well, Bruna, I've been thinking about how it's going to be even if Lula wins, because if it's something that we have been seeing is if Bolsonaro loses, okay, but the people who are still here and vote for him and all the bad things that we've been seeing, legitimate on hateness, probably is going to continue. I think it's going to be a hard time this beginning of the governor, whoever wins, but that is something that I want to say, especially for the final remarks that you said. We are going to be on top of it because, especially for Black people, like right now, just for you to have an example, we also have the governor's elections here in Rio de Janeiro, as you have in all other states, but there is a police operation going on right now in Maré, and we have already received like couple numbers of people who has just been dead and killed. And this is something else that we're gonna be like, we have to watch. So I don't know how things gonna work. I don't know who is gonna be, the governor and the president starting in January. But if there is something that the Black movement, the Black women movement especially, we're gonna be on in everything that's gonna happen because it's unacceptable. We still have a country where Black people are dying every other day, like we were like papers or, trash or something. So whoever comes in, despite the tensions and whoever is, in charge of all that, we're going to be asking them to watch and take care of the racial issues that we still have in Brazil. And it's huge. And no one actually is speaking about it. And we need that to be said.
Thank you, Aniele. Bruno?
Well, again, I think that we should think about these two scenarios. And in case of Bolsonaro's victory, I think that probably the tensions among him and the Supreme Court will go to a hotter degree, even hotter degree, because in a second, if he wins a second term, he will feel himself even more powerful to act against constitutional rules. And we need to stress that the next president will have the right to nominate, to indicate another 2 judges for the Supreme Court. So in case of Bolsonaro's victory, he will have 4 out of 11 judges on the Brazilian Supreme Court. So he probably will have more control. It's not a control in a sense of a majority, but he will have more means to affect the Supreme Court decisions. So probably he will use its power to try to implement a lot of measures that he could not implement during his first mandate, his first term. But on the contrary, if Lula wins, I guess that the relationship with the Supreme Court will be normal as it was in the past. I don't see any attractions among Lula and the Supreme Court. I think that for him, the challenge, as I said before, it will be with a more conservative Congress, as Beatriz had said. The decision about the Congress profile on the next legislature, on the next section of the Congress, will be crucial for Lula to have means to implement his social or progressive reforms in Congress. So I think that the tension in the case of Lula's victory will be among the president and the Congress.
Bruno, we received a great question from the audience from Gail Trainer. Interested to learn the panelists' thoughts about the implications of the elections for the division of power within Brazilian institutions. We often say, like, the Supreme Court as a monolithic block, right? Or the military as a monolithic block. And we all know there are nuances. So especially when it comes to the judiciary and the military, that's the question. So we want to hear your thoughts also.
Yeah, it's a great question. We saw during the Bolsonaro's first term, he was trying to lean the Brazilian actions of Brazilian institutions, like especially those control institutions, like the federal policy, like the customs and the tax body in Brazil, all the bodies that regards, for example, corruption control, and also most important of all, the army in Brazil. We saw Bolsonaro stressing those not only corruption controls, but also environmental control in bodies like IBAMA. So we saw a lot of actions of Bolsonaro's authorities to restrain the action of the Brazilian bodies of control, especially on the executive. In the case of a second term for Bolsonaro, I think that this process will continue and even more powerful. But if Lula wins the election, I think that these forces will be put on the contrary and trying to restore the independence of those institutions. And I don't have any fear about the Lula's or the PT actions to influence the Brazilian institution as Bolsonaro's did.
Thank you. Moving to Beatriz, hey, please.
So I will discuss executive legislative relations, which are one of my research areas. And to me, the tension between the executive and the legislative branch will depend on who is the next president and who is the new Speaker of the House. If Bolsonaro is elected, I think Lula himself or Lula himself will be reelected as House Speaker. And we will get more of the same, only much worse. And by that, I mean more democratic erosion. If Lula is indeed elected, it doesn't look like he will work for the reelection of Lula as House Speaker. But at the same time, Lula is influential within the House. He might manage to get elected. A Lula administration with Lula as Speaker will be tough initially, at least until Lula decides to support him or sort of support him, which I think being part of the Centrão should happen. That's our expectation. But a speaker more aligned with Lula would make things a lot easier for the president in terms of approving his agenda. So there are many variables here that we still don't know how they're going to play out. And I just want to call attention to the main point of my answer resides on who holds the position of House Speaker. House Speakers are too powerful in Brazil. They were powerful before Bolsonaro, and they're more powerful after Bolsonaro. If Lula is wise, he will work with lawmakers from his party or his legislative coalition to discuss how to improve and modernize Congress. And the first thing on my own list for modernizing Congress is that we need to discuss the powers of the speakers.
Excellent. So I think that all of you raised important nuances of our democracy, of our systems, which are very important for our audience. And I do believe they raise also important questions as we move on. And I want to now hear from Paulo Sotero and his final remarks about everything that was said and what he sees as what's next for Brazil after elections. Thank you, Paulo, for being here with us.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to join the conversation. I think all the presentations were very good, to the point. There is indeed the complexity of executive, legislative relations is well described by Bruno and by Beatriz. And what Aniele brings to the table is absolutely fundamental in terms of respect of human rights. And this is essential that this is reaffirmed in Brazil. From the United States perspective, and that's what I have been here for 42 years. I was a correspondent from major newspapers here for most of that time. And I helped to create the Brazil Institute and led it for 14 years. From the perspective of Washington, what you have is, first of all, the US government, the government of President Joe Biden, has been stressing the democracy in Brazil, praising the electoral system to the point of saying that this is a model system in any democracy, that democracy should pay attention to what Brazil does. This is only a process. Brazil built its electoral system over 3 decades, and it is, in my view, very strong, exemplary. The United States has stated its total confidence in this process, in the electoral system in Brazil, and said through its spokesman that it will recognize the results produced by the system, and it should thus do it as soon as the results are out. It doesn't mean endorsement of this or that. The Brazilian people, the same people that put Bolsonaro in power, will now have a chance to confirm him or to change, and most likely, according to the polls, elevate former President Lula again to the presidency. This is fundamental to understand. The United States is not taking sides, but then there is the second point. the United States has always, with an interval, which is the Trump administration, but the United States, from Republicans and Democrats, has always stressed democracy. The Republicans today are in a different state, but the United States of America is a country of democracy, for democracy, and sees the current event, the current international situation, or see in the current international situation a battle between democracies and autocracies. This has been stated by President Biden. This has been stated by senior officials of the government. I think it's in the, why is that stated so? Because of an act of aggression by Russia towards Ukraine. Russia invaded Ukraine without provocation and is now engaged in a war against Ukraine where tens of thousands of people, mostly Ukrainians, but also many Russians, have died. The United States has sided with Ukraine alongside with all democracies of Europe, all democracies that, let's say, have self-respect. Brazil, in that topic, has faltered. President Bolsonaro went to Moscow 2 weeks before the invasion to declare his support for President of Russia, and this will cause, I think, a major surprise in the Brazilian population, and more even after the left in Brazil kind of endorsed that. Not clear. I think this will be assuming that the polls are correct and former President Lula will be president again. I think this is a first challenge for President Lula vis-a-vis the United States. Do you support Russia or Ukraine? There is no middle ground in this. This will be a first important, very, very important challenge. All traditional allies of Brazil, Europe, Japan, in the Americas also, the United States and Canada mostly, are with Ukraine. The United States has devoted already $15 billion in weapons sales to Ukraine, so Ukraine can defend itself, and this will continue. I can also say that the United States will follow it very much. I heard just recently from very senior people that served in the government or are serving in the government that the United States believe that Brazilians will elect one president. Brazilians will elect not a party. President Lula, the most likely next president of Brazil, is supported by a coalition of parties, not by along the PT. Although Beatriz is correct to say that PT is the only organized political party in Brazil that has an identity, the PT will govern again if it and will govern more successfully, I hope, if it governs in coalition. This is a very important point, aspect of the electoral process in Brazil. And then, obviously, Brazil will have to decide to take positions. The United States touching upon one topic. I have a couple of topics to touch on. One topic very important, we know, for Brazil, a reform of the United Nations Security Council. The United States has expressed support for a reform of the United States Security Council, with the expansion of the number of countries that have permanent status, that would be permanent members. This has been a driving demand, a driving topic for Brazilian diplomacy for at least 50 years. Now, if Brazil has to calculate in order to get the support of the 3 democracies of the 5 countries that are permanent members of the Security Council, being democracies, the United States, France, and England, Brazil has to make its own decision on how best to get the support of the countries, okay, in order to be elevated to the Security Council as a permanent member. Another thing has to do with the war in Ukraine. I don't know if this is somewhat followed in Brazil or not, but because I look every day in the media, I don't see much about it. As a consequence of the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, Sweden felt very insecure, and along with Finland, asked to become a member of NATO, getting protection of the Atlantic Alliance against, obviously, Russia. Okay? Now, most Brazilians either don't know or have not paid attention to the fact that during the Dilma government, Brazil has decided to re-equip its air force, buying Swedish jets, Gripen. The first 40 jet fighters, Gripen, have started to be delivered already to Brazil. And I think this agreement for the next 40 has been signed or is about to be signed. This has an important implication. The Air Force of Brazil, which is the most advanced technologically of the military branches in Brazil, will see now the benefits of technology transfers from Sweden to Brazil, since this next lot of 40 airplanes will be put together in the state of São Paulo in an Embraer plant in Gavião Peixoto. This is, I know that many in the sort of on the left in Brazil don't think much or oppose the Brazil being closer to NATO, but this is a done deal. There is nothing people can do about this. This has been a sovereign decision by Brazil to buy airplanes from Sweden. Sweden now is becoming a member of NATO, and Brazil has obviously a closer relationship with NATO than many in Brazil would have liked. But this is done. You cannot go back, okay? And I find this as a sort of promising. Sweden has a very special place emotionally in our hearts in Brazil. It was Sweden that offered the stage for this first event that allow Brazil to appear in the world stage. It happens in 1958. I was 8 years old, and it was a World Cup where Brazil won. Sweden beat Sweden by 5-2, and Brazil kind of emerged. What was it? We retribute to Sweden by giving them a queen. The Queen of Sweden is the daughter of a Brazilian from São Paulo. So, those they are not absolutely important, but those things count. There is I think there is an affection in Brazil for Sweden and vice versa, and this deal about the military is, I think, very welcome, and it will be the basis of Brazil rapprochement in the military field with NATO. Brazil has always been close to the United States in this area. Remember, Brazil was part of the Allied forces in Second World War. And here we are, leaders have to make decisions. I think as tough as the scenario is, there are also possibilities of Brazil re-emerging in the rightful place of international leadership, but being careful on how you play this game. There is nothing predetermined. The size of Brazil does not predetermine its importance. Brazil has to invest more on quality than on quantity. Brazil's bigness is a fact. To be determined is Brazil greatness, which has to do with quality. So with that,
Thank you, Paulo. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for bringing the implications of all this in Brazil's foreign policy, and as how we are positioning the country internationally. And as we move forward, we move from a rhetoric that is based on election, and then we have more clear vision of fresh policy proposals that are coming up. So I think there are a number of underlying questions on how can we ensure that democracies are not only resilient, but they can also deliver social, economic, and political stability that people are demanding, as you very well said. And besides that, I think we have the question on, will Brazil build or not a future of progress, a word that is in our flag and that needs some reinterpretation? How will Brazil position itself as a global protagonist in transforming a world of clean and abundant energy and in the implementation of a more sustainable model of development? And I wanna, before I wrap up and thank everyone, I wanna hear in 30 seconds the final remarks from our panelists. And in advance, I thank you all for your time and for being here, for accepting the invitation for this panel. Starting with Beatriz. 30 seconds for final remarks, Beatriz.
Let me make sure I unmute myself. I just want to talk a little bit about what we can expect for the election itself. And to me, is we can expect chaos. And to me, the question is just how much. If Lula wins the first round, Bolsonaro will contest the election result. Chaos will follow. If we have a second round, Bolsonaro will contest the election result for almost a month. In other words, unless he wins, I think Bolsonaro will incite chaos. And the most important question to me about the election is how we will get out of it. How will the transition of power occur? Who will stop Bolsonaro and his supporters from creating havoc? And I just want to say that we should not accept any sort of amnesty or deal for Bolsonaro, his administrative officers and the military officers that took part in his government. There should be no deal for him to leave office, but I am skeptical. I think that he and his supporters will create chaos, and political elites might think that the way out of it is by making some sort of deal or arrangement. And this is where we are in Brazilian democracy, unfortunately. Thank you again for the invitation, and I really hope I'm wrong.
Bruno?
Oh, okay. Before all of those things that Beatriz has said about the Brazilian politics, of course, we will need to observe what will happen during this week. We know that small changes of the electorate could lead to a runoff or to a final decision on next Sunday. So we will have to be focused on the movements of each candidate, especially those that are on the lead, Lula and Bolsonaro, but especially Ciro Gomes and Simone Tebet too. Those movements will decide if we will have or not a second round on October 30th. Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you, Bruno. Aniele?
I just want to say thank you. I'm very contemplated by Beatriz's words, so I think we should really pay attention to that. But I'm expecting a better scenario. I'm not going to be thinking about that now. I know this week is going to be tough. I mean, it's been tough to do all of these campaigns this past months and days and weeks, but hopefully we're going to have a good result, and we're gonna come back to the place where Brazil should have never left, you know, a place where we can speak what we want with respect, with people being alive and no hungry and no unemployment. Thank you.
Paulo, you wanna give your 30 seconds remarks?
No, I think I said everything that I had prepared to say. Just again, to praise the quality of this debate and to wish you, Bruna, and to all the participants, good luck. I believe I started voting at almost 40 years old. I am 72. So election to me is very important. Elections, as you all know, is a happy day in Brazil. People love to vote. There is a party in the streets, etc. I hope that continues. I think that I don't believe too much in the threats of conservative people to enrolar, to create chaos. But it remains to be seen if they behave or not. There are ways of controlling that, but we have to be very, very, aware of the possibilities. Democracy demands participation. Democracy demands attention. Democracy depends preparation from the voters. Go to the polls knowing what you are going to do. Remember the names of the people you're going to vote for. Study them. See their biographies, etc. And it's not only in Brazil. It's here in the United States. And also, this is very important. I think that we are going to come out of this on the good side, that Brazil has indeed an opportunity to go back to the path of growth, economic growth, and political growth. Again, let's stop all the talk about Brazilian bigness, that we have everything big, that we have the big river, all the things that we keep telling ourselves, and let's focus on quality of government, quality of education, quality of healthcare, the things that really are important for citizens. So with that, I thank you very much, Bruno, for the invitation. And as you know, I am at your disposal.
Thank you, Paulo. And as you, I believe that the Brazil courts, congressional leadership, civil society, the international community, business groups are ready to confront contests of election results. I'm confident. I hope it's a peaceful election. And I'm happy that you brought up the economic growth, since I believe that the recent rise of authoritarian populism worldwide reinforces that political implications related to low growth rates are no longer some theoretical issue. I think that democratic ideals, yes, they are under active attack, and reviving economic growth is also strategic to fight ideologies that are contrary to freedom and to offer more satisfactory economic and social conditions to the entire population. So with that said, I want to thank you all for attending this event. Stay tuned, because some of the questions that we raised here are going to be in Brazil Institute's programming in the following days. There is more analysis coming out, not only about elections, but also policy changes. Thank you all panelists for helping us to wrap up our heads around all the nuances and complexities of this subject. And special thanks again to all in the audience. And finally, I want to thank all Wilson Center Latin American program team behind the scenes who make it happen. I wish all Brazilians and myself a very peaceful election day next Sunday. Thank you all very much. Hope to see you all soon.